Let's get ready to RPG!
RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG!
Hello and good evening. Welcome, everyone, to the Knights of Last Call. My name is Derek Melinda. We've got a couple people re-signing up for the adventure. Big shout out to our good friend. We got a lot of people coming in. This is awesome. Shout out to Larry Taylor, my very good friend, for 5 months. Sheppy Rodriguez for 4 months, and Chase Holloway for 2. Very, very cool. Awesome. Thank you so much for everybody. Solana says, hello, I would like to adventure. Well, you know, hey, listen, if you're a member of the Patreon or you just want to throw us some money out here on YouTube, you can go ahead and do that. So good evening, everyone. Happy Dune Eve. Some of you may have already seen the movie. Some of you may be on your way to see it. Some of you may be seeing it right now. But of course, tomorrow, March 1st, 2024, is the release of the part 2 of Dune, Denis Villeneuve's latest take on the cult sci-fi masterpiece by Frank Herbert. Very famously made into a movie in the 80s by David Lynch, which you heard the main theme from that and the intro to this stream. A pivotal work of science fiction and a huge influence on me, both the book and, quite frankly, the movie. And I am not one of those super Dune purists in a certain sense. I think Dune is great. I think Dune Messiah is fine. I think Children of Dune is okay. I think God Emperor of Dune starts to get a little out there and weird. And, you know, by the time we get to Heretics and Chapter House Dune, you know, what are we even doing here? Which isn't to say those are bad books. I just feel like, you know, when that much time passes in the galactic history of a story, we lose a lot. And actually, I'll talk a little bit about that as I get into this today. And of course, I have not read anything by Frank Herbert's son or Brian, Brian Anderson. All the other Dune books that they popped out. But tonight, we're gonna be talking Dune. We're gonna be talking we're gonna be talking the series. We're gonna be talking about the books, but we're really gonna be focusing on the Dune TTRPG, which came out from Modiphius a few years ago, probably right around the time, I think, when the first movie was coming out. So it's been out there for a little while, but it is part of their 2D20 system, which Modiphius has been putting out a number of games over the last, I don't even want to know, 8 years, maybe 10 years, not quite 10 years, maybe 8 years. And Modiphius, I respect them as a publisher because they don't just like boilerplate their core system onto every single IP that they get. Now, I don't know the process by which they acquire IP. I actually spoke with a Modiphius agent last year at a convention, and I said, I have to ask you a question. How do you all end up securing some of the biggest licenses out there? You know, Dune, Fallout, Conan. And the gentleman who was I was speaking to was just like, look, I don't know, you know, the owner of the company, he's magical. You know, he was basically like, there is no rational explanation for how Modiphius ends up with all of these IPs, but they do. And but what I like about them is they're not afraid to tinker with their core product, and they will continually develop and, you know, upgrade, if you will, make changes to make the 2D20 system better. And I do personally feel like each major release of the 2D20 system has gotten significantly better than the ones before it. So we're going to talk about the 2D20 system. We're going to talk about Dune, and specifically we are going to talk about Dune Adventures in the Imperium, which is the name of the TTRPG, and you know what's going on with that. So let me give some quick shout outs to everybody who's here with me today in chat. Before I go ahead and get started, just a quick shout out. Thank you to all of our patrons. I am in the midst of filing my 2023 taxes, and thanks to your continued efforts, we actually managed to make a profit last year, and that's after I paid out my employees some of the dividends, and after I paid out all my rent and all my studio expenses and all this other stuff. But I actually made money, and of course, it's all kind of a side hustle thing, so none of it gets withheld. So now I have to pay, my Social Security and my Medicare and, all that stuff on it. I do want to jump on Karama coming in with the super chat. Would you consider Dune to be a sandbox game? That pun is definitely worth a a strong. Thank you. I am going to explain the 2D20 system quirk. I'm actually going to start off with that explanation. But Karama, no. I mean, obviously the joke is that it is, but I don't really think that the game is a sandbox game. I really do think the game is primarily a narrative one, but we'll definitely get into it. But thank you, Karama. By the way, we do have 2 tip goals tonight. One is for our super chats, which is another class deep dive stream. You may have remembered these. This is where I go all the way back to the beginning of the game and talk about a class and as it's kind of evolved from original D&D through 1st edition, 2nd edition, 3rd edition, 4th edition, Pathfinder, 5th edition, Pathfinder 2, sort of that D20 lineage. We've done Sorcerer, we've done Druid. So there's we've done Bard. There's a bunch that we've done so far, and those have been pretty popular. We haven't done one in a while, so threw that out as a tip goal or a super chat goal. And then I saw something in chat, or maybe it was in a comment, but somebody was asking, they were talking about how much they really appreciated the combat and tactics videos that we had done for Pathfinder 2 a number of years ago when, I was basically teaching my group, the Knights, how to play Pathfinder 2. And they said, wow, I'd love to see that, from a PBTA perspective, and I feel like a lot of people, even in the Knights of Last Call Patreon, which I consider to be a very high level of RPG proficiency, as far as a group of several hundred people, I think the quality there of the game mastery and the playing is very top notch. But a lot of people there are still very hesitant to run a PBTA game, or they don't quite fully understand it. And so I thought about the idea of like kind of almost doing a combat and tactics, but PBTA style edition. And so that's going to be our tip goal tonight. We'll see if there's any interest out there. By the way, we do have a link to Drive-Thru RPG, but apparently there's a humble bundle to get this game. So if you're interested, Benjamin says that there's a humble bundle, so maybe go check it out. Evening to you, RPG Fieldcrest. What is up, Neutromancer? Henry shouting out the Dune main theme by Toto. Thank you, Henry. Speaking of Henry.
Henry tipped $10. Love the class deep dives.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of those as well. It's a fun show because it's not often I get to really utilize my encyclopedic knowledge of 50 years of the game's history. But when we do those, I get to do it, and usually in the research for it, I always discover something new, or I remember something that I had probably not known for 20 years or 30 years. So it's very interesting for me as well. Kyle says, I've never seen a 2D20 system before. I'm excited to see how this works. Yeah, Kyle, we will definitely get into it. Thank you for being here. Mike T says, once again, it is the legend. It's one of my favorite. Usul has called a big one. Once again, it is the legend. And then the bwah, 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 bwah. Yes. But yes. Hello, Derek and his Fedakeen, also known as my knights. What is up, Mike? Thank you. Pumpkin here, listening while he's working. What's up, Pumpkin? The spice must flow, Heavy Metal Mystic says. Quark is here. Hello, Quark. What's up, buddy? Ken is here, and he says that the sleeper has awakened. Father! Father! The sleeper has awakened. Actually, there's that line from the David Lynch film where it's right before they leave Caladan, and Duke Leto is with his son, and he says, he's looking out, and they're on Caladan, and he goes, I'll miss the sea, but a person needs new experiences. They jar something deep inside us. There's, it's just such a good line of dialogue. And he says, something's without change, something sleeps inside of us and seldom awakens. And then he just turns to him and he goes, the sleeper must awaken. And it's like, who would ever have that normal conversation in normal life? I'd be like, Dad, what the fuck are you talking about? But in the movie, it's pretty sweet and it works really well. Yes, this is Modiphius as well. Yep, this is all Modiphius. KC, what is up? Henry correcting me on the author that worked with Brian Herbert. It is Kevin J. Anderson. Thank you. Looks like the majority of the books are on a humble bundle. Sweet. Yeah, this game, again, it's been out for a number of years. So there's the core book, which I actually don't think I have on me because I think I have it in my bedroom because I was getting ready to do it. But they have a, they've got a whole collection of books. They've got, the great game, Houses of the Landsrad, and Power and Pawns, The Emperor's Court.
Philip Bush tipped $10.
And Sand and Dust, the Arrakis source book. So, they've been putting out product for sure. No doubt about that. Well, thank you, Henry. Philip. It was our good friend Philip. It is the combat medic himself. CMB, what is up, sir? Well, it is awesome to have you. We love Combat Medic Bush, and I'm happy to have him here. Awesome. Thank you for that tip. Thank you for supporting the channel. Looking forward. We're almost halfway to a PBTA system dive. That's awesome. Thank you. Thanks for coming. Good to see you. Bob is here for the Dune hype. KC says, I wonder if it's the hot girl problem. Small print publications think big brands like Dune and Star Trek won't license to them, so they don't even bother asking. They pull out without even trying. Yeah, maybe. I only know that Dune is about sand, fair, and worms that live in sand and hate water. Specifically, I would say this: Dune is about spice, and that it's not really about sand. Trevco says, isn't there still one combat and tactics video that is being edited? That is a Pathfinder 2 combat and tactics video. And technically it was released to the patrons as a Patreon bonus content video. But yes, that is a Pathfinder 2 combat and tactics video. But if you're a patron, you can get it. I only know Conan. All right. So I'm confused how that 2d20 system maps to Dune. All right. Well, this should be educational then. I sent my money in the wrong direction. All right, Henry, I'll swap it up. I'll swap it up. Hello, quick and dirty. Hello, hello. What is up? All right. So, let's talk a little bit about 2d20, the game system. Now, again, there have been changes and modifications over the editions, but before we get into like Dune properly, I kind of want to talk about how the core set of this is set up, of how 2d20 systems are set up, because I'm going to get my whiteboard up because you know me. So let me get my whiteboard up first. She's coming online. Did not take long. Okay. Where's our whiteboard? Boom. All right. We got ourselves a whiteboard. All right. The whiteboard cometh. Okay. So if I were to describe 2d20 in the current iteration, particularly in the sense of the Dune iteration, okay, it is what I would call Legend of the Fate in the Dark. So again, if you've been watching this, this would mean nothing to almost anyone, but to us here at Knights of Last Call, I think we can start to parse out what this, in my personal opinion, what this game derives some of its, what are some of the features in this game set that harken back to other game properties that we might be more familiar with. And so obviously we see here a component of Legend of the Five Rings. We see Fate, and we see, Blades in the Dark, Forged in the Dark type games. So let's start with what 2d20 does. 2d20, for starters, and this varies, from game to game, but you are typically going to have a list of skills. And those are going to be very high level. Okay. Like if we were playing Star Trek, one of the skills might be like computers. All right. And one of the skills might be like, I don't know, fighting. And one of the skills might be like diplomacy, right? Very, very high level. Okay. They're not like the super precise. And there's only going to be like 4 or like 5 or 6 of them. So there's not a lot of skills. And these are going to be rated somewhere between, don't quote me on this, but these are going to be rated somewhere between like 3 to like 6, give or take. So if we have computer 6, we might have fighting 3, and maybe our diplomacy is 4. Okay. And we might have some other skills as well. The other thing that 2d20 has is basically what we would normally call your ability scores. Okay. Now this is where the games can differ a lot. Okay. But it's not quite an ability score like the way we think about it from, D&D. It's a little bit more generic than that. In fact, there's an element here which can be very sort of not just Fate, but Fate Accelerated Edition. If you remember, we talked about Fate Accelerated Edition, and Fate Accelerated Edition really focused not on whether your character, whether your character was strong or whether your character was, had a high wisdom. The ability scores in Fate Accelerated Edition are how do you do something? Do you do it with, are you quick about it? Are you, are you strong about it? Are you tough about it? Are you, quick-witted about it? Are you charming about it? How do you accomplish your task? And so the ability scores might be something a little bit more generic, like, like your prowess, like your how focused, your focus. It could be, I'm just picking ability scores here. Luck. Okay. If the skill is what you're doing, then the ability score, but again, it's not really an ability score, is the how. So if this is the what, this is the how. Okay. Now, that could start to sound a lot like Legend of the Five Rings. Because if you remember in Legend of the Five Rings, in Legend of the Five Rings, you have your skill, which might be like, your skill with a katana or your skill with writing poetry. And then in Legend of the Five Rings, we had the five rings. And the GM or, whatever you were doing in the fiction, if you're attacking someone with your katana, that is obviously going to be the katana skill. If you're, you're writing a poem, that is obviously going to be poetry. But where Legend of the Five Rings kind of gets into this interesting mechanical role-playing space is the idea that you then have to pick how you are doing the thing. Are you doing it with passion and intensity and zeal, and you're trying to create an emotional response? You might even be getting a little bit emotional yourself. Well, then you are using the fire ring, and you are using the fire approach. If you're being very logical and calm and measured, then you're making it. If you're relying on recall and history, then you're making a very earth-based approach. So 2D20 has a very similar thing. So, for example, now these ability scores, I think, can range from like 3 to 8. And again, you'll typically have 5 of these, just like you did with the skill. Okay, so let's say that our luck is 5 and our prowess is 6 and our focus is 7. Okay, great. So how do we make Ikemo says, you're doing it with your highest ring, obviously. I'm a really bad fit for Legend of the Five Rings. Actually, I don't want to get off topic on that, but like, it's okay to do it with your high ring. Just understand that has consequences in the game. Like, yes, you might be able to be more successful because you use your fire ring and your fire ring is your highest, but maybe because of the context of this particular scene, making an emotional plea and writing a bit, maybe it's a very, risque poem, right? In terms of samurai drama, it's almost scandalous. That could potentially cost your character, right? It could cost your character honor. It could cost your character reputation. So there is a downside in the game system to just always jamming your highest. Okay. In addition, it's possible that the daimyo or the imperial agent that you are trying to impress actually doesn't like being, he's not an emotional person. He's almost an aesthetic. He's almost a monk. And you trying to create this fiery oratory would actually backfire, and the check would actually be harder for you than it would be for someone who was maybe using a void or an earth-based approach. All right, back to 2D20. So we're playing our Star Trek game. We're playing our 2D20 game, and there's a ship, and it's like it's the middle of a firefight, and I need to reboot the computer because it was taken offline. Okay, and it's kind of like like any other game. We're having a conversation, and something comes up. I want to do something. I want to accomplish something, and so it sounds like I'm doing a computers check. I think we can all agree with that. So we start with computers, and my value is 6. Now, the question is, how am I doing the computers? Am I just relying on my luck? Am I relying on my intense focus? Or am I relying on my natural abilities and my prowess? Well, this doesn't really seem like a scene, maybe. in the skill in the way that things are playing out, that I would really have time to focus and hone in on the problem. And you might argue that I'm just trying to get lucky, but my character isn't just, they know what they're doing. So this is going to be more about their skill. It's going to be more about their prowess in this ability and how well they can, keep cool under pressure. So that means that for our purposes, my computers is a 6. We're using prowess, which is a 6. And we add these two numbers together and we get 12. Now, I know what number I have to roll equal to or less than on a D20, okay, to get a success. So if our D20 roll is less than or equal to 12, that is +1 success. And so if you're familiar with Dragonbane, Dragonbane does the same thing, right? Dragonbane has a skill. It's 16 and basically says you need to roll a 16 or less on a D20. The only difference is that 2D20 has one extra step, which is instead of just having one number like 15 or 14 or 13, you add them together. So you have to add two different numbers together to get to what you're doing. And the point is, if we were trying to do computers, but we were having, maybe focus was an 8, okay, instead of a 7. There we go. So focus was an 8 instead of a 7. Well, now, instead of it being a 12, right, it would be a 14. And so, again, if our D20 is less than or equal to now 14, we get a success. Typically, in 2D20, you don't roll 1D20 though. You roll, guess what? You roll 2D20. Okay? This is a dice pool game, but instead of using D6s, you use D20s. So a standard normal boilerplate check is you're going to roll 2 20-sided dice. For each 20-sided dice that gets equal to or less than your target number, you will get a success. All right? Now, a couple of caveats about this. Obviously, like Dragonbane, where low rolls are good. So a nat 1, if you will, is basically a critical hit, right? It's a critical success because we want to roll low. And that adds 2 successes, right? And if we roll a 20, that is obviously a failure, but it also causes a complication. So this is, again, where we can kind of get into that metric where, like a Forge in the Dark game, if we were to roll our 2d20 and the first die was a 9 and the second die was a 20, it's not just like rolling with disadvantage or advantage. All the dice count, okay? So in this case, this 9 would generate a success, awesome, and the 20 would generate a complication. So we might succeed at the task that we are trying to do, but still create a complication. And a complication could be anything, right? You disarm the bomb, but you set off the alarm. You silence their radios before they can call for help, but they lock down the room that you're in. So like, there's a lot of different. This is a very narrative style approach. Very, in my opinion, Blades in the Darkish. There is no hard and fast rule about what the GM can and can't do with a complication. Now, where things get a little different from let's say our Forge in the Dark games, is this game does have the idea of difficulty levels. So as we all know, in Forge in the Dark, if you get a 6, you succeed. Full out. It doesn't matter. Powered by the Apocalypse is the same way. Powered by the Apocalypse does not have DCs, right? It does not have TNs. There's no like idea of this is a harder task. You need more successes or a higher number. It doesn't have that. But this game does. And the difficulty levels can be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And the difficulty levels, this is how many successes you need to succeed. So we can see that, and by the way, I think like you might say, why is there a 0? Well, we can get into that, but needless to say, standard difficulty is going to be 1. 2 might be something that is challenging. 3 is very hard, and 4 and 5 are like legendary and epic. Now, Callimachus, very quickly here, says you need 5 successes on 2 dice. Yes, obviously, you cannot get 5 successes on 2 dice. Now, one thing that I should note before we get into this, though, is remember a nat 1, okay, which is a critical success, does give us 2 successes. So in the event that we were trying to roll 14 or less, okay, and we rolled a 1 and a 3, we would get plus 2 successes and plus 1 success. So we would have a total of 3 successes. But obviously, relying on rolling nat 1s is a little dicey, a little chancy, right? So what you can do in the game is through your character's talents, which are basically like feats or, special abilities, certain talents will grant you potentially bonus dice in certain circumstances when it specifically and precisely matches. However, this is where the game is going to take a strong turn to the fate. The primary way that you get more dice is you buy them with narrative meta currency. Okay? 2d20 is very big on narrative meta currency. Okay? And in this particular case, there are 2 forms of narrative meta currency. Okay? The players have one, and they have it collaboratively. It is a collective pool that the players have, which is called momentum. Okay? And momentum can have up to 6 points stored in it. If you would put more than 6 points of momentum into the momentum pool, it goes away. Now, momentum is a party resource. The party all shares in this one pool. If I take momentum out of the momentum pool, then on Callimachus's turn, there's less momentum in the momentum pool. So if I want to, I can spend, 1, 3, or 6 momentum to gain +1, +2, or +3 bonus D20s. So this isn't like hero points in the sense where it's like, Pathfinder 2 hero points, where it's like, you might give out 1 or 2 a session, maybe once an hour. Momentum is something that is going to, if you've ever played Fate and you've played it fast and furious, then you know that these meta currencies, they're going to go up, they're going to go down, they're going to go up, they're going to go down, they're going to go up, they're going to go down. It is a sort of living, breathing resource. So let's say that our momentum pool was at 4. And the GM drops, a difficulty 3 task on us. And, maybe it's my character that's rolling. And I go, okay, well, I have 2d20 base. And the way that I'm doing this and the way that, all the numbers work out, I need to roll, less than or equal to 13 in order to get a success. And we need 3 successes. Okay, so unless I crit a bunch, this is not going to happen. So basically, it's kind of a conversation with your group. Hey, is this something I want to spend some of our momentum on? I could spend 1 point and get 1 dice, or I could spend 3 points and gain 2 dice. Do we think that this is something that's really important? Should we be spending this momentum? Etc., etc., etc. So maybe the group says, you know what? I think we really need to figure out who this assassin is. Go ahead and spend 3 points. So our momentum gets reduced down to, our momentum gets reduced down to 1. But my character, for this roll, I pick up 2 bonus d20. So now I'm rolling 4 d20. And any result that I get that is a 13 or less is going to be a success. So that's one way that we can acquire more dice. Are there hard rules for the distribution of momentum, or is it GM fiat? Yes and yes. So the main way that you are going to be awarded momentum is when you get more successes than the task required. All right. So remember here our example here where, so for example, let's say the task difficulty was 1. Okay. And I rolled, a 1 and a 3, and I get 3 successes, right? 1 counts as +2. A 3 counts as +1. So that's 3 successes. So I beat the difficulty by 2. The difficulty was 1. I got 3 successes. So the delta there is 2. Our momentum would go up by 2 points. And now we have 3 momentum. So basically, think about it, it's like momentum in the story. It's momentum in the scene, right? If your character's kind of kicking ass and taking names, again, if you're familiar with Fate, then, you recognize this basically as sort of a boost, or in PBTA terms, it's like a +1 forward. It's basically the idea that, like, if you're crushing it and you're killing it, you start to, build up momentum, just like in, sports, right? If a side can start to win, they can start to kind of snowball a little bit because they're riding high on the momentum. But, even with our 4d20, okay, getting 3 successes is still far from guaranteed. So there's another thing that we need to pay attention to. He's heating up. Exactly. All right. Remember what I talked about before about skills, and we have our ability scores. Well, skills are a very generic group, but your character can and will have what are called focuses. And focuses are an area where you are particularly skilled. So sure, I'm really good at computers. I've got a 6. But I'm really, really, really good at, like, engines, or engineering, or, that kind of stuff. My fighting kind of sucks. It's only 3, but maybe I'm really, really good with, I don't know, with a batleth or something. I was raised by a Klingon. Okay. So some of your skills are going to have focuses. If your focus applies to the role that you are making, then it's not a nat 1 that counts as a critical hit. It's any dice roll that is equal to or lower than your character's skill ranking. All right. So let's take a look at what this means. Let's say we've got computers, 6, prowess, 6. Okay. So on the numerical timeline here, we know that a nat 1 is going to give us +2 successes, because that's just the rule of the game. And because our computers is 6 and our prowess is 6, that's a 12. Anything from 2 to 12 is going to be +1 success. And then anything 13 to 20 is going to be no successes. But let's say that my character was making a check, and because of the fiction and because of what we're talking about, my character is trying to, reset the plasma arrays, right? Or, back flush the dilithium matrix with an antimatter infusion. So this is clearly in my character's wheelhouse. It's in one of my areas. It's in one of my focuses. So because of this, this diagram here changes a little bit. Now, if I get a 1 to 6, that is +2 successes. If I get a 7 to 12, that's +1. And a 13 to 20 is still +0. So when you use your focus, you have a much greater chance of getting a critical hit. And so when we're rolling our 4d20 and we need to roll less than a 13 to get a success, but if this was using one of our focus, then maybe any number between 1 and 5 would be a crit and would be worth +2. So if we end up rolling like a 4, again, we're rolling 4 dice here. If we roll a 4, 7, 12, 18, this 4 is +2. This 7 is +1. This 12 is +1, and the 18 is +0. And so we actually got 4 successes here. And remember, we were trying to get 3. So not only did we succeed, but we actually generated a little momentum, I think. There might be some rule about whether you can generate momentum or not. But I mentioned before that this door works both ways, because the game master has a pool as well, and it is called threat, and it is essentially unlimited. Now the GM, this is a game that, for lack of a better word, mechanically cheats, but it's in the rules, so it's not cheating. So you can't fudge, because you should never fudge. But in this game, if you fudge, you are cheating. And the reason why I say that is, if I, as the game master, want to have, the House Harkonnen guards show up, as you're coming in, because I think it'd be a really cool narrative moment, I can do that by spending threat. But if I don't have the threat to spend, then I can't just decide that those guards are there. I mean, now you could argue that in any game system, that is a kind of a bad idea. But in this game system, that is expressly verboten. The way that your character, the way that the game master introduces twists and essentially is allowed to fudge is by spending threat. All right. And like the players, this is a pool that the GM uses for themselves, for all of their characters, all the NPCs. This is the idea of a shifting balance, a drama tension meter, right? If the threat pool is low, then the party knows, by the way, how big the threat pool is. I would recommend having like a little dish, out in front of the game master screen, something public. The players should understand. Again, it's a narrative game. So, it's one of those things where if the tension if the threat pool is low, then the tension is low. There's not a lot that can go wrong. Sure, things can always go wrong. There's no guarantees. But if there's a lot of threat in the threat pool, then that the game master can pull out shit whenever they want. They can roll a bunch of bonus dice. Everything is a lot scarier, and it can really, really go to shit real quick. So there's a balance between the game of building up your momentum, and the threat is lower, and then it shifts, and the party's going to go back and forth and back and forth. And it's sort of like, the narrative roller coaster, the beats, the tension, the sort of story beats that we see in a movie, for example. And again, there's different ways that threat can be generated. But one of the ways that you can generate threat is the players can give it to the game master. That's right. Like, for example, let's say I want a bonus D20, but we're all out of momentum, or we don't want to spend it. Guess what? Instead of spending momentum, I can give the game master threat. And it's on the same scale here. If I give the GM 1, 3, or 6 threat, then I can generate +1, +2, or +3 bonus D20s. You're basically borrowing against your future. All right. Like you're saying that in the short term, we need these extra dice to succeed. In the long term, this may cause problems for us, but we can basically borrow against our future by spending this threat and or by giving the game master threat. And so there's going to be this sort of back and forth between threat and momentum, where you're going to be building it up and spending it, and then it's going to, ebb and flow. And that's going to sort of decide the sort of narrative pacing of your session. And so this is a very narrative game. It is trying to it's not just trying to create a story. It's trying to create a specific type of story. This is very similar to Fate, in that Fate has these narrative metacurrencies that are designed to sort of enforce and reward not just genre stipulations, but sort of 3-act structure, rising action, you're right, denouement, like the whole ebb and flow of, what we would consider to be a book, a movie, a TV show. There's an element here to this game that is very much concerned with that. So I would say that this game is more complicated than, Blades in the Dark or Powered by the Apocalypse. Because one thing that Blades in the Dark and the Powered by the Apocalypse don't really have is they don't really have meta currencies. Not really. Stress is a little bit of a meta currency maybe in Blades in the Dark, in the sense that you can use it to resist, but you don't have the, and it's not as much of a narrative meta currency. Blades in the Dark and Powered by the Apocalypse, by and large, don't really care what kind of story that you're generating. It's just that you're generating something fun and interesting. This game's a little bit different. It wants you to create a quote unquote good story. Casey says, if you prepped for them to be there, is that different? Feels like a low prep GM might need a little more threat available to them than a GM running an AP or doing railroad and high prep. Yeah, correct. Casey. I mean, you're still running the game. I mean, if you feel like, let me phrase this way. If what is happening would occur normally in the fiction, or if you had it, if they go into a room, into a Harkonnen security thing, I mean, there being guards there is not outrageous or unexpected. But if the group is meeting with their spice smuggler contact, and then poof, the door kicks in and a bunch of Fremen commandos, have come in to sort of disrupt it because they want to kill you for smuggling spice, that is a threat. That is a threat spend. Quick and Dirty calls it a GM intrusion from Cypher. It's the same basic idea. Anand says it kind of makes sense for Dune to have a central economic mechanic. Yes, absolutely. Because again, Dune is all about spice, and Frank Herbert wrote Dune as sort of an allegory to oil. Spice is oil. Again, it's only available at the time. This was the 1960s. It was available in the desert, and you had all of these powerful nations all sort of warring and battling for control over what was a desert that no one would care about if it wasn't for the fact that it produces the most valuable resource in the known universe, which was oil. So spice is sort of a metaphor for oil, and even Chom, which is Combine, Onnit, Ober, Advancer, Mercantiles, was basically OPEC, right? And so the idea is that there was this sort of secret consortium that is secretly running basically everything. And that was sort of, again, a critique or a satire of sort of the modern day political situation that was going on. So before we get into the game proper, let's bring up this sheet here This is an example character sheet that somebody made. It wasn't me. In this particular instance here, we have the Na Baron himself of House Harkonnen. We have Fade Rotha, okay? And in this case, we are looking at a Dune character sheet. Now, Dune's a little bit different because all of the 2D20 games are. But we can really get a good gist from what we were just saying here using Dune. So the first thing to notice is that we have, instead of an ability score, okay, instead of strength or dexterity, instead of Legend of the Five Rings, where we had fire and earth and water. And remember how I said before that Legend of the Five Rings and 2D20 care about what are you doing? That's the skill. And how you are doing it, right? In Legend of the Five Rings, how are you using your katana? Are you using it very defensively, carefully, cautiously? Okay, that's earth. Oh, you're doing it very deceptively. You're staying out of range. You're dodging and ducking and weaving. Okay, that's air. So a lot of these 2D20 games care about what you're doing, the skill, how you're doing it. But Dune is different. Dune cares about what you're doing. That's the skill. But then it asks why you're doing it. Not how you're doing it. Why are you doing it? What is your character's motivation in this moment? And that is why Dune has, instead of some of the other things that other games have used, it has drives. And Dune breaks down your character into 5 drives: duty, faith, justice, power, and truth. So in this game, whenever you're making a check, the question will be asked, why are you doing this? What is your motivation here? What is your drive? And, on this channel, we talk a lot about games. We debate this endlessly in the Nights of Last Call Patreon. What we call true role-playing games. And some people have a dislike for that term because it makes it imply that other games aren't that would mean that they're not true role-playing games, that they're false role-playing games. Some people have used the term mechanically reinforced role-playing games. So this is an example where this game is requiring you to understand your character's motivation in pretty much everything that they do and every scene that they do. So in this case, we can see that the drives range from 4 to 8, and it just goes up 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So our character is very driven by the acquisition of power. And so if the reason that we are doing something is because it's about me, power, gaining strength, gaining power, gaining power, personal prestige, or whatever the case may be, if that is what's going on in this scene, then I will get to use the 8 from the power rating when I am calculating what my target number is for my D20. So, obviously Fade Rotha, if you know the character from the books, played by Austin Butler in the new film, to be seen tomorrow by me. You can see this guy is really, really good at battling and being, quick with his movements. So if he is attempting to gain power, or the motivation in this particular check is power, he's going to be rolling with an 8 plus a 7 or 8 plus a 6. On the other hand, this character could give a shit about justice. And so if this character in a scene ever ends up making a check where justice is their motivation, they're going to be rolling with a much lower number. It doesn't mean that sometimes they won't do that. This gets back to like the Legend of the Five Rings. Oh, so everything my character does is about power. That's you would be playing your character optimally, mechanically, but wouldn't you also be playing your character correctly role-playing wise? Your character is about power. Your character would always be trying to figure out the things that are going to reward them with power. So the game is rewarding you for your mechanical motivation, right? And so that is kind of the component. But now Anand says, problem is you can justify any drive and there's no mechanical benefit to using a lower one. So Anand, there is a great line from Torchbearer which basically says, don't be a weasel, don't reach. If you're playing with people like that, don't play with people like that. End of story. I mean, that is unfortunately the case. Now, to be clear, Dune does have several rules, which is if you want to use a drive, the statement in your character's drive has to apply to the action or situation at hand. And if it doesn't, then you can't pick that one. So if, I personally think that the aspect of a player trying to figure out how their character is motivated in a scene, even if it means them thinking about how to be broken, is probably beneficial because people are going to put more thought and emphasis into their character does. But if somebody's just always like, oh, I want power. I'm flying this Thopter because of power. I'm helping out the Baron because of power. I'm helping out the thing because of power. I'm helping out the other thing because of power. I just tell that person to go back to Pathfinder 2 or D&D. That's all. You don't have to make a big deal about it, but they are going to ruin your game. Again, it would be like playing Fate with a weasel. There are some games. Okay. Side rant. Some games, I'm not going to say which games. Some games are inherently about saying the rule set or the GM set or the GMs or the players, for the player to the GM and the GM to the players. I don't trust you. I think I don't want you to have, you're not an adult. I don't want you to be able to make a decision. I don't trust you to do the right thing or the appropriate thing. So I have this rule, which is like the law on my side, which will allow me to enforce a version of the truth. So there are games that are designed to protect the players from the game master and the game master to be protected from the players, because inherently those games assume that you are playing either with people who are not adults or people who should not be trusted. There are other games where they trust you a little bit more and they give you a little bit more rope. Yes, rope that if put into the hands of an immature person or a person with, bad intentions could hang themselves with or hang the group with. So there's absolutely a downside to that. But I will say that there is something about to be said about, not if every game has to be designed so that some, weaselly power gamey fuck can't ruin the game, then you're going to be stuck with some pretty shitty role-playing games for the rest of your life. So, all right. Going back. IKMO says, so you make statements for your best 3 drives. So if you want to use them, you have to stick to your principles. That is correct, IKMOS. We will definitely get into that, but that is correct. When you want to use one of your best drives, it has to align with your statement. Otherwise you can't use it. Power, power, power. We call them villains. And to be clear, Fade Watha is obviously a villain for sure. I had a friend who always tried to weasel TTRPG game mechanics. In Blaze in the Dark, he always wanted to train on his downtime so he could advance faster than anyone else in the party. I don't play TTRPGs with him anymore. You're correct. What that player is doing in that scene is totally legal and totally within the rules. They are not quote unquote cheating at all, but they are missing the forest for the trees. So back to Fade here. So, and this character sheet. So we can see that this character basically would decide, what is my motivation? What skill am I using? Is it battle? Is it communicate? Is it discipline? Is it move? Is it understand? And then you would add those 2 numbers together and you would roll 2d20, and you have to roll equal to or under that combination sum. Each number of the d20 each d20 that rolls under or equal is a success. Anything over is a failure. If you roll a nat 1, it counts as 2. If you roll a nat 20, it's not only not any successes, it also creates a complication. We can also see that this character has some talents, like the slow blade. If you know Dune very well, that's a classic thing. The slow blade penetrates the shield. These are, for lack of a better word, feats. And that's basically how they work. Now, there's other aspects to this game. I'm not going to lie, but by and large, that is the core of the game. There is only one other thing which I want to sort of touch on, which is down here in the bottom right-hand corner, because, and I love this book because they do have something where they say, wow, it's a lot of different points, because there's threat and momentum. Remember, momentum is like the player's pool. Threat is the GM's pool. But this game does have a third narrative metacurrency. I know. It's like, I get it. It's a lot. Even the game admits that it can be a lot. Your character has what's called determination. And determination points are basically like supercharged Pathfinder 2 hero points. They are a personal resource. You start with one of them. And to earn additional ones, it's very much like Fate, where you kind of have to work against your character a little bit in order to earn determination. Okay. So, and this gets back to those drives and those statements that we were talking about before. So let me give you an example. So when we go to fulfill one of our drives, we might be doing something, and the drive that best applies here is duty. But and it says, I serve the house because it will one day be mine, right? So duty is all about serving your house because it will one day be mine. But what if my character was called on to do something that would help the Baron, but not me? Remember, I'm the heir apparent. So that clearly falls under duty. I'm helping out my house, but it doesn't really help out me. So this is going against my character's statement. Okay. So when that happens, I can't use duty. I'd have to use something else. But the game does give you an option. It says, well, you can use your duty and you can use 6. And we'll even give you a point of determination because you're in crisis. And basically you get to make this check, but then you have to cross out your statement. And you can't use that drive, okay, potentially for a number of scenes, because your character is conflicted about what they thought about duty. And what ends up happening is at a later time, after a scene in which your character has time to maybe talk with another character or introspect a little bit, you have 2 choices. You can either create a new statement, which represents how your character has changed and grown in their view of duty, or you can lower duty by 1 point. So duty would go from 6 to 5, and your 5 would go to 6. And that basically means that duty is becoming less important to your character. Okay? Because challenging your assumption makes a difference, makes a growth opportunity for your character. So for example, let's say that my character is in a situation where they need to help out their house, okay, but it's actually going to be hurting my chances of controlling the house one day. Well, I decide to do it anyways, but then this is I'm in this sort of crisis moment. My character is awarded a determination point, and I have to cross out, I serve the house because it will one day be mine, because I just operated against that. Now, I can't use my duty drive for a number of things, but then later in the session, I'm talking with someone, and I realize that, my success is my house's success. And I need, so I say, I kind of have a new view of my house. And so now, instead of changing the numbers, I create a new statement about my duty, which is maybe I'll say, my house, as my house goes, I go, this idea that maybe my characters shifted their viewpoint a little bit. So again, this is role playing, but it has a mechanical effect in the game. Let's see here. Within the bounds of a single scene, like a conversation where a character is motivated by a single drive, are they just using it for every check within that scene? Not the weasel and invested player. Tundalus, I will say this. Checks in 2D20 should be fairly on a much lesser scale than you might get to them in a D20 game type game. I'm not saying that you wouldn't make maybe a couple of checks in a scene. But yeah, I mean, I would think that if the primary motivation hasn't changed, and for whatever reason you're called on to make 2 or 3 scenes, 2 or 3 checks potentially, then yeah, I think you would just keep using the same drive. I think that would be acceptable. When playing optimally and being a weasel are the same, the game is not only broken, but it becomes impossible to distinguish between the two. There is some truth to be said about that, Anon. I mean, this is why game design is hard, right? We want to give people freedom, but we also are afraid of abuse. So it is tough. It is tough. I mean, correct. I would say it's not just mechanically boring. I think it's just narratively boring more than anything. I don't really care what it's a number on a dice roll. I don't give a shit. Like, is it really that different if you use an 8 versus a 7? I mean, like, is that really going to change the feel of the game a whole lot? No, but if you're always just like, my character's driven by power, 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 that just gets boring narratively. I don't think it's really a mechanical issue. So let's take a look at Dune. So a couple of things about that we need to know about the Dune game is that it starts with a very lengthy introduction about the entire Dune universe, most of which is taken from the books. And quite frankly, this is a lot. This is a lot. I really wish they kind of, they do have this, which is later. This is called the Overview of the Imperium. And this just basically gives you it talks about the Landsrod and the Great Convention, which is the nobility and the noble houses. It talks about the triad of power between the noble houses of the Landsrod, the Spacing Guild, which basically controls everything, and then the Emperor, who is ostensibly the ruler of everything. It talks about the spice melange. And so this kind of gives you a basic introduction, but it does go pretty deep into the lore of Dune. And, to a certain extent, if you're playing this game, it's because you like Dune and you want to play in Dune. But what's interesting about this game is its focus on this sort of, Game of Thrones, Dune-esque, approach towards your house. So the idea of this game is that you and your fellow players are all members of the same noble household. Now, that doesn't mean you're necessarily all nobles, okay? But you are all part of the same house. And you might fill different roles within that house. And so this game, the first thing that you're going to do is create the type of house that you have. In fact, the game even has a house character sheet where, again, you're going to write down the name of your house, what your home world is, what are your domains, what are the roles of your house, some of the enemies, and there's elements of the game that basically work tied to your house. And they kind of give you different stakes, like you could be basically like a very small, newly founded minor house. You could also be one of the great houses or the major houses of the Imperium. And so this kind of gets to the idea of, how hard do you want the game to be? Because one of the things here, look at this. Okay, house type and threat. The game master has a pool of points called threat, which we talked about. They can use to create all manner of problems and difficulties for the player characters. How much threat the game master begins each session with depends on what type of the house the players have chosen. If the players have chosen to start as a house major or a great house, I will start the session with 2 or 3 points of threat in my pool already set to go at the start of the game per player. 4 players, 12 threat. Why? Because you're a big house. You know, you're one of the major political families in the empire. There's going to be a lot of problems coming for you. Okay, more money, more problems. You know, it's tough to be at the top, right? Whereas if you're a no-name nobody house, obviously you won't have as many resources available to you, and you won't maybe have the kind of political connection and power. But also, nobody really gives a shit about you, and so the GM actually doesn't get to start with any threat if you are a nascent house. And so some of this just comes down to what kind of style of game do you want to play? Do your players want to play? And so, you know, you can have kind of a conversation about that, deciding what kind of house you have. And then you get domains. And you can think of domains as like, what is your house? You know, what are the strengths of your house? What does your house do? What does your house produce? And you can see that a great house can have several primary domains, a number of secondary domains, whereas a smaller house is going to have access to less production. So what kind of house might you be? You might be a industrial house, a farming house, an espionage house, an artistic house, political, military. And then again, what are the areas that you have expertise in? Like when we think about some of the houses from Dune, right? I mean, House Harkonnen was known for their assassins, for being masters of spying and treachery, right? I mean, it goes without saying that this is an area that they had in spades. Whereas obviously the Atreides had an elite force of warriors trained by Gurney Halleck and Duncan Idaho, with sort of elements from Dr. Yueh and almost to within a hair's breadth of a Sardaukar. So, you know, what kind of thing does your group do, and what kind of thing? It doesn't have to be all spying. And your house could be known for, man, we've got some of the best. We've got some. You're playing Settlers of Catan in space. Actually, there was Starfarers of Catan. I forgot about that game. You could be like, our house is known for their cheese. We are the cheese house. House Cheddar. I mean, you could do that. So anyways, obviously, this is going to be a very different style of game. I mean, honestly, though, before you get like too, shitty about it, before they took over Arrakis, House Atreides, a.k.a. Duke Leto's house, Paul's house, their major crop that they sold was called pundi rice. And it was a very, very shelf-stable grain, basically rice grain. And they produced it on their water world of Caladan in the, quadrillions and quadrillions of tons. And they basically shipped it all over the Galactic Empire to feed people. So House Atreides, one of their domains was actually farming, was actually crops and producing this pundi rice, as it was called. So again, we could go through all this stuff, but there's all sorts of areas of expertise that your house can have. And then we talk about your home world. This is mostly fluffy bullshit time, but it's describing your, as a group, there's a collaborative element here. What is your home world like? What kind of domain does your house have? If someone's artistic, or maybe you use like a Mid-Journey or something, Dolly, you can create your banner and arms for your house. And then you have house traits. Now, we haven't talked about traits, but traits are very similar in this game to aspects from Fate. And so remember that the way that, aspects work in Fate is you can spend a Fate point to sort of tag a trait, and that can give you a bonus in the game. So traits in Dune work very similarly, where there might be positive traits, there might be negative traits. And a way that a lot of the game's mechanics work is through what I call the narrow mechanical interface, which is to say, rather than having a ton of rules for what fire does, if we were in a scene and your ship that you were on the control room caught fire, I would just assign that scene the on fire trait. And then we as a group could potentially say, oh, that you're trying to override the engine core. Well, that's going to be more difficult because the room is on fire. And if somebody rolls a 20, which is a complication, aka a problem, and you're in a room that's on fire, I might point to the on fire trait and say, oh, maybe you're on fire now. And so traits are this, sometimes traits are permanent, they're on your character, but other times they are oftentimes temporary, and they sort of represent what is going on in the narrative. And you can use these traits to very basically quickly have a understanding between your players and you, what is going on in this scene. All right. So your house itself has traits. And you can basically sort of kind of tie your group together in order to all have some access to the traits. Now, the other thing that this game talks about is what it calls agent and architect. Now, this is very strange. Is this the page where it talks about it? No, none of these pages have page numbers. Oh, wow. Okay, we're far ahead. Okay. So let me go. We're on page 92. I don't want to forget about it. Okay. I go all the way back to the beginning of the game. Okay. We're going to talk about agents and architects. In Dune, Adventures in the Imperium, we utilize two different levels of play to allow players to work as powers that be behind the scenes as well as agents in direct missions. Architect level play involves the player characters using their assets from a distance to achieve an objective. This might be as a general moving their troops, or a spy master activating agents as assassins or spies on a mission. In agent level play, the characters actually get their hands dirty and perform the missions themselves. So what does this mean? It means you might have a conflict scene or a infiltration scene or an espionage scene. And we're used to thinking of this as the agent, aka my character, our characters, the group's characters, the party's characters are the ones that are infiltrating the base, that are doing the espionage. It is our characters that are on the battlefield and fighting against the House Harkonnen troops. That is the agent level play. But this game has rules designed to not only support that, but also to support this architect level of play. And so your infiltration mission, your espionage mission, might actually be your player characters, in a secure bunker somewhere, right? Or handing out, receiving reports and sending out commands and sending out messages. The battle might not be your character going hand to hand with a bunch of Sardaukar. It might be your character in a command post or in a command bunker, giving commands and ordering troops to different positions. So it sort of takes this idea of conflict and expands it from the sort of here and now first person to this very broad architect concept. And so while in a personal combat, an asset that you might use might be, your knife or your personal shield. If we were doing a battle and it was more of a wide scale thing, and I'm the general, my assets might be, my unit of elite guard, my backup ornithopter bombers, right? So it's like, instead of using long swords and crossbows and kajals, I'm using units of troops or supplies or, more esoteric, sort of more broader concepts of what might be my asset in that, or what might be my equipment in that scene or in that conflict. So that is something that is pretty unique about this game, which I think is really, really interesting. It's also really, really strange for me, just as a side tangent, as we're here at the beginning of this book. And it says, it's just so weird for me still to see this in gaming books today. If it is difficult to get everyone together in one place, the internet offers many different options to play online. As playing the game is mostly just like talking to your friends, any meeting platform like Zoom or Google Meet will allow you to do that. There are also a few platforms designed for games, such as Roll20 and Discord, that have additional features like tactical maps and dice rolling programs. It's just still very strange for me to see that in games, even though it's a good thing. So when you create your house, you as the players get to decide what role your character is going to have in that house. Okay. And generally speaking, you shouldn't have somebody as the ruler, I think, as a general rule. But your character might be the sword master. You might be the consort of the ruler. You might be the chief physician. You might be the heir of the son of the duke. You might be the mentat scholar who supports the house. You are not just a nobody, okay, in your house. You are someone important. You're a general. You're the spy master. You're basically, in Game of Thrones terms, okay, you don't really get to be the king, but you are the small council. So someone can be, the master of coin, and someone could be the master of ships, and someone can be the hand of the king, and someone could be the master of whispers, right? And someone could be the grand maester. So you're like the small council for your house. And so, you have this power. Your characters are important. You are leaders within your house. So again, very interesting approach to do this. And then you create your enemies. And, every house, unless you're like a nobody house, every house starts with at least one or two enemies. Quick and Dirty says you could be the head of the house. Yeah, I think it says it doesn't recommend it, though. If I recall correctly. Yeah. Because usually you are the agents of the house. And while it is not quite time for your player characters to ascend this high, one day they will. So each player should take a moment to decide who they serve directly in their house. So, yeah, like you could be the head of the house, but it's basically saying like it's better if you don't. I mean, again, this is very similar to me to a really good Legend of the Five Rings campaign where the daimyo of the house is an NPC, and all of the party are loyal sworn retainers of that daimyo. It creates a really fun, interesting dynamic. I'm a big fan of it. So then you go ahead and your house is done, and you create your enemies. And by the way, as an enemy house is never far away, the game master can spend 1 point of threat to make any enemy house appear in the adventure in some fashion, whether in person or merely as a rumor. Their appearance might be part of a plan against the player characters, or they may simply be putting into play a plot of their own. So basically, your enemies are cheap for the GM to just cash in and bring in. Now, Quick and Dirty does bring up something interesting, which I do want to. I was going to get to it later. But one of the things that Star Trek Adventures did, which is the game that came out really before Dune, that was really, really interesting, is in Star Trek Adventures, by and large, you play as, the bridge crew. You play as the main characters, right? You're Captain Jean-Luc Picard, you're Commander Will Riker, you're Lieutenant Commander Data, etc. You're Dr. Beverly Crusher. But the game understands that not every character goes on every away mission. And usually in an episode of Star Trek, there's like the A plot, and then there's like the B plot, and sometimes there's even the C plot. And it's very rare that you have all of the main characters all focused on one task, one scene at a time. So when the group beams down to the weird alien planet, sure, Worf goes, Geordi goes, Commander Riker goes. But what about the character who's playing Counselor Troy? Or what about the character who's playing Dr. Crusher? They don't go on these away missions most of the time. So what the game what Star Trek did is it lets you create secondary characters that were kind of like a group character. In some cases, these might be used over and over again. In some cases, they were temporary. They might even be kind of like red shirts and get killed. But it basically it's a very interesting way to allow your characters to play even if you are not in the scene with your main character. And in some cases, you know, I mean, I played a little bit of Star Trek Adventures. I almost liked my backup NPC character more than my main character. So it could be a really fun, interesting thing. So what Dune does is it continues that, and it basically has this idea that, it may not make sense for the heir of the house and the house's spy master, who might actually just be like, I don't know, an old woman or something, to be the ones who are breaking into this highly covert Bene Tlilax installation. But everybody agrees that everybody wants to play it. So what you can do instead is you can create these sort of temporary characters, these agents, these NPCs, and then you can play out that mission that your main characters set up and put into position and gathered all the intel for, and they're the ones making the call. But instead of playing it out at architect level play, you could still play it out at agent level play. You would just use these sort of temporary characters, these sort of pseudo PCs, these quasi PCs instead. It's a very interesting idea, and especially in Star Trek, but I imagine in Dune as well, it solves a lot of problems. Because, you want to be the captain of the ship and the commander of the ship, and you want to be the heir of the house and the war master of the house and the spy master of the house. But it doesn't make any sense that these people would be going on these, like, I don't want to say suicidal, but these really high risk missions. Like, you would never send these characters into that, scene. So very interesting. I'm not going to go super deep into how you make a character. And by the way, you could see here that they talk about your main character. A main character is a player's first and most important character. Each player has a single main character. These are the focus of the adventures that you'll be playing in, and they are the protagonists of the story and will normally be prominent members of a noble house, though not the leaders of the house yet. But you will also have supporting characters, and these represent notable supporting characters. These are your reoccurring guest stars. And then there are minor supporting characters. And these are the aforementioned, as Ken was saying, red shirts that you might only bring in for a scene or two, or they're just representing some, rank and file soldier that doesn't really matter, doesn't really have a name that matters. But again, we talked a little bit about this when we did the Ars Magica stream, right? The idea that you have your wizard, but you also have your companions or your cohorts, and each player at the table has a wizard, but they also have a host of other PCs that are like their minor PCs that they can play. This kind of troop style play, as it is sometimes called, So we make a character, and we already kind of discussed the basic rules of 2D20, but here they are again. Again, you're going to roll several dice. You get one success for each one that is less than the target number. And the target number is used by adding a skill and a drive together. If you get under, you get a success. If you get a nat 1, you get 2 successes. Excuse me. If you get a 20, you get a complication. The game master will set the difficulty rating from 0 to 5. That's how many successes you need to get. If you roll over, you gain momentum. You can also spend momentum in order to gain bonus dice. So there's a bunch of things here. They describe, we already saw the character sheet from earlier, but it goes into detail. What is the battle skill? What is the communicate skill? What is the discipline skill? Right? It breaks it all down. And then what are your focuses? And by the way, they even have charts like this mean absolutely nothing, but I like that they are in this game, because for a lot of people, they go, I want to know what a 5 means, and I want to know what a 7 means. Well, here you go. You know, if you're an 8, you are a master of that skill, renowned for your expertise. And here are those focuses that we were talking about. So your character might be really strong at battle. You might have a 7 battle, but you might actually have focuses. And remember, those allow you to accumulate successes a lot easier. You might be really good at using rifles or long blades or short blades, or maybe you're more of a strategy or tactics type of character. Battle itself, covers a very wide range. So the focuses can be very, very, very detailed, and give you, a fair amount of character customization. Then they go into the drives. We talked about these before: duty, faith, power, truth, and justice. And again, a rating system. And you're going to have one drive at each of these rankings. So from 8, this is the single most important thing for you, to 4, you care very little about this thing. And again, going back to people being car-oppy, I'm okay with that, because if your character is driven by justice, and justice is their 8, and they don't really care about power, which is their 4, so the game mechanically rewards that character for seeking justice and avoiding power. But that feels internally correct for how we have described this character. So there's a certain element of that, which, again, I don't want people to be weasels and reach, if this is very clearly not something about justice, but you're trying to use your 8 anyways. But if a character is like, no, this is right, this is wrong, and I have to do the right thing, justice, 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 it's kind of like, yeah, that's what drives your character. And again, if 3 of your drives will be 6 or higher, you'll have 1 at 4, 1 at 5, and then you'll have 1 at 6, 1 at 7, 1 at 8. The ones that are at 6, 7, and 8 have to have a statement, and they give you a long list of examples. These aren't the ones you pick. You could pick them, but these are examples. And a lot of these are, famous quotes from Dune. But the power to destroy a thing is the absolute control over it. Very famous Dune quote. Power comes at a knife's edge. Another. Power attracts those who are corruptible. Strength is nothing without grace. So those are all examples of power statements. So you need to decide, what does power mean to me? What does power mean to my character? Because if I want to use that drive, then the thing that I am doing has to align with that statement. Cool art throughout the book, by the way. And then lastly, on your character, you'll also have your character's ambition. So this is sort of like your character's long-term goal. It's usually a short phrase describing your ultimate goal or desire, and is defined by their highest drive rating at the time that you made your character. So if your character was obsessed with justice, that was where you had your 8, okay? Then your ambition has to be connected to this idea of justice. That's why your drive is an 8. So for example, let's say that the Harkin, I don't necessarily know that this is the case, but let's say we're Dr. Yui, right? And the Harkonnens killed my wife, or, I think they killed my wife. And so my character is obsessed with justice, right? With getting back at the Harkonnens. And so my ambition, right, is to, free my wife at any cost. And so, Dr. Yui is obsessed with trying to do what he perceives as, get justice for his wife. And he even says that in the film, when he gets killed for his treachery, he goes, "You don't think I know what I've gotten? You don't think I've gotten justice for my wife?" And he gives the tooth and all that other stuff. So your ambition has to align with that. And again, a character's ambition can change over time. If your highest rated drive changes, and again, remember, your drives can change as the game goes on. If it ever goes below 6, you have to pick a new ambition. So that's kind of one way to make a character. The other way they make a character is they have a little bit more templates, right? So if you want to be a Mentat or a Bene Gesserit, this is sort of training wheels mode, a little bit easier, gives you suggestions and how to, more templates, and lets you kind of pick a generic archetype. I kind of want to be a cool, like, duelist type person. Okay, cool. Here's some stuff that you should pick up. So again, this is more of like, if you want the quicker approach to building a character. All right. And they've got some cool, information here to help you when you're trying to pick your drives and what, because a lot of this stuff people might struggle with, so there's a lot of information here about how to pick your drives and how to pick your drive statements. Once you define the order of your character's drives, you need to create drive statements. And here's a bunch of bullet points about how to do that. And, again, more bullet points and more bullet points. Again, they're really trying to hold your hand through this. So, this is a game that is going to kind of reward and encourage and, dare I say, require role playing. And then our character's done. So here's an example of a character. This is Cara Mole. She is the commander archetype, but doesn't really mean anything. And we can see that she is driven mostly by her faith. My family trusts me. That's her drive, right? So faith for her means faith in her family, faith in, the people around her. But duty is very high for her as well. She is the heir of her house. And power. I get what I want. Now, truth and justice, not really what's driving her. She's not as concerned about truth. She is not concerned about justice. She is just consumed, basically, like, a good example of a character who would have like an 8 faith, right? And, a very high faith might be like, believe it or not, like Tywin Lannister, right? Because he was all about his family. So maybe he's more like 8 to duty, but he was all about this belief in his family, to the point where it eventually destroyed him. And here are her skills. And she has 3 traits: noble, honorable, and Bene Gesserit. These are traits that are permanent to her character. Her ambition is to become a secret master assassin. Okay. And then her talents. Then again, these are like her feats, basically. What does she start with? She starts with hyper awareness, masterful innuendo, and prana bindu conditioning. For those of you who don't know, prana bindu, which is a Bene Gesserit discipline, which means the nerve and the fiber, is basically the ability for the Bene Gesserit to basically have complete control over every nerve and muscle in their body. Through exquisite control and the ingestion of the spice melange, they can acquire this level of hyper focus and hyper discipline, where a Bene Gesserit, for example, can bend their little toe. They can move their little toe around independently without moving any of their other toes. All right. I wish this game had mechanics for conflicting drives. Well, it does. How convenient. Let's skip ahead. All right. We'll get back to traits in a second here. All right. So when we go to do something, the skills is pretty much set by it. I mean, if we're in a battle, we're rolling battle. If we are trying to escape a collapsing sandworm tunnel or something, or a collapsing siege, then we are rolling our move. If we're at a party and we're trying to figure out who is the assassin, we're probably using an understand skill. So the skills are pretty easy to understand. So what are you doing? And what are you doing and why? Remember that we said here, this game is a little bit unique. It doesn't care how, it cares why you're doing something. So whenever we're going to make a skill chest, first we pick a skill and it should be pretty obvious. We just established this. Second, select your drive. This reflects your character's motivation and drive behind the action, why they are doing what they are doing. Some of your drives come with a statement. Remember, our top 3, our highest 3 drives each have a statement. These describe the most important aspects of what your character believes. providing both advantages but also limitations. Remember, when you are that focused on a drive, it can potentially work against you as well. To select which drive to use, this is why I said earlier when I said there are some rules about, you can't just pick a drive. There are some rules. To select which drive to use, look at the character's drive statements and pick the one that is most appropriate to the situation. Now, again, I get it. People could be weasels and try to say, oh, this is appropriate to the situation. But, again, as we discussed before. Quick and dirty, thank you for stopping by. We'll see you soon. To select which drive to use, look at the character's drive statement and pick the one that is most appropriate. This is not necessarily the most advantageous, as drives can often be a disadvantage in some circumstances. The drive linked to your drive statement you choose is the one you must use for the test. If multiple statements are appropriate, then you can choose one of them. And if none of the statements apply, then you have to pick one of your character's drives that does not have a statement, aka your low ones, aka your bad ones. So if what you're trying to do doesn't fit the statement of your 8 or your 7 or your 6, you have to use the 5 or the 4. Basically, if your character isn't motivated, then they're not motivated. So when you wish to use a drive, you must check to see if the statement agrees with your action. If the drive statement agrees with your action, then you can use that drive. In addition, because it aligns, you can spend one of those points of determination. Those are like the superhero points that we talked about before. You cannot spend determination if the drive you are using does not have a statement. Now, determination is pretty awesome. I think spending a point of determination, instead of rolling one of your D20s, you set it on 1. So basically, if you spend a point of determination, it is one of your D20s is an auto crit, which is 2 successes right out the bat. So when you can act in favor of your drive, then you get a big mechanical reward because you can spend your determination to really get a lot of successes. Now, what happens if the drive statement clashes with the action? If the drive doesn't support the action or it goes against that drive, then the game master may offer you a point of determination and ask you to make a choice about the drive. Either comply with it or challenge it. So basically, if you wanted to do something and you have a drive statement that sort of, fits with it, but it's opposite of what you would want to do, then this is a problem because you have two choices. Now, the game master will reward you with a point of determination if you choose this. You can either say, all right, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to follow my drive and I'm going to follow my motivation. Or you could choose to challenge it and you can try to say, I'm going to change how I think. I'm going to change how I feel. And so either way, you're going to create a mechanical change for your character and a mechanical change in the scene because of what happens here. Doc Flamingo says, I'm not a big fan of games that dictate character behavior through mechanics. And you know what? I think that's totally fine, Doc Flamingo. I do think that there is a lot of advantages to be had through games like this because, there's this idea of, as I've said before, what are role-playing games? Is a role-playing game just a game and then we just add role-playing on top of it? Right? Think of it like a layered cake, right? There's the role-playing layer. It's sitting on top of the game layer. Or is it an amalgamation, right? Is it all merged together? Is it one mass? Is a role-playing game a game with role-playing? Or is a role-playing game a game about role-playing? And I think that it's such a broad genre. We have games that are basically one type and we have games that are another type. This is a game about role-playing. Other games like D&D or Pathfinder 2, those are games that have role-playing sort of wrapped around them on top. But you could strip away all of that basically, and you could still play the game just fine. In fact, I know a lot of people that do just that. And, they get around and they don't really do any sort of characterization, motivation. They're role-playing in the technical sense, because they're playing a role-playing game, but they're not role-playing in the sense that I think a lot of us would think. So basically, if your drive would not align, then it's a potential for your character to earn these determination points by basically going along. Now, by the way, it's not bound, Doc Flamingo. You could still say, nope, I don't want the determination point. I don't want the free point. I will use one of my lower level drives. But if you want to use that high level skill, then you have to create problems for yourself. Do I dare tempt fate and hope that internal monologues are required before every roll? Only if David Lynch is your GM. Oh, that's so good. So there we go. And again, they have sort of a flow chart here about which one you should use. So if you're trying to pick which drive is most appropriate, if you have the exact right drive, great. Pick that, carry on. What if several of the statements pick one? It says, here, you can pick from whichever you prefer, usually the highest, but consider how your character is deciding to approach the action defined by the drive you use. If it feels more in character to pick a lower rated drive, that's great too. So the game basically says, look, if multiple ones apply, yeah, you're probably going to take the highest one, because why wouldn't you? But if you really feel like this other, drive would be more appropriate, even though it's lower, you can use that one if you feel like that is what the more in character decision to do. If none of them fit the action, sometimes you don't have a drive or a statement that fits, in which case you should choose one of your two lower drives, your 4 and your 5, that don't have a statement. This represents the character attaching no real focus to the tasks, as it doesn't mean that much about them. Our character is obsessed with power and duty and truth. But they don't care about justice and they don't care about faith. So if those situations, if it's not power and it's not duty and it's not justice, then we're going to roll lowly because we don't have the motivation to do it. If you have a drive statement, but it's opposing what you're trying to do, right? In other words, the drive statement is an opposition of what you're trying to do. In that case, you can choose to challenge the drive. The game master may offer you a point of determination. Remember, those are like superhero points. If you take it, you must delete that statement after the test. The character has chosen to act against their drives, and they must rethink their values. This is a way for you to change your character's drives if they are not suiting the way that you are playing them. Remember, we said before, you would delete that statement and later on eventually get to add it back, potentially changing the numbers a little bit, reflecting that your character is changing and growing and their view of the world is shaping. If the drive seems appropriate, but the statement doesn't fit, then this is called complying. And basically, you go ahead with it, but it creates a complication. Basically, a way for the GM to say, yeah, this should be a duty roll, but your duty statement doesn't really apply, so you're going to get a point of determination by just going along with it. So the game doesn't force you to do these things, but it does reward you. And it says, hey, if you're willing to challenge your character's beliefs and change some things about your character by going against your asset, by challenging your drives. Or if you're in a situation where it's like, well, listen, I'll bribe you with a determination point. Just comply and do what your character should do. It's still a role-playing game, so ultimately the person in the driver's seat is the player. But the game does not shy about trying to bribe you into basically having your PC play kind of the way that it, quote unquote, should be played. So yeah, so that's like the basics of 2D20. That's like the basics of Dune. I think there's a lot to like about this game. Now, of course, realize that there's an entire chapter on conflict, right? Which is, basically encounter mode. Okay. It doesn't use a 5-foot grid. And this game defines several different layers of conflicts. There's dueling rules, this sounds very Legend of the Five Rings-ish, right? In Legend of the Five Rings, you have 4 types of conflicts. You have duels, skirmishes, intrigues, and mass combat. This game has dueling, skirmishes, warfare, intrigue, and the only one it adds is espionage. So again, there is a lot of overlap between the two of these. So these are the areas of the game where they mechanically clear. Yes, this is a game that basically has social conflicts. And your character is going to use their assets in order to acquire success in these social combats. So each of these conflicts represent the type of stuff that you would expect to see in Dune. Again, like Legend of the Five Rings, it's a mix of politics and warfare. And, whereas Legend of the Five Rings, being samurai drama, doesn't really focus as much on espionage. Although ninjas do exist, but samurai would never, be caught dead doing anything so dishonorable. But in Dune, espionage and skullduggery and poisons and surveillance. That's the name of the game. But there's whole sections. This is for dueling. They have detailed rules about dueling, and you have to set your guard and what kind of weapons you're using. And then they have skirmish rules, which kind of uses a zone-based combat. I have no idea what you're talking about. Clearly, the Scorpion clan is honorable and would never do such a thing. Espionage has a really interesting way. It has like a combat map of espionage, but really what it is it's more like you drawing like the cork board with all the different thumbtacks and the string connecting them. It's basically like as you sort of go through the espionage conflict, you're sort of connecting the dots, connecting the lines. There's warfare, which has to do with zone-based maneuvering squads of infantry, ground vehicles, aircraft. And then lastly, there's intrigue, which is, again, this idea of a social conflict. So it's almost 9 o'clock, so I'm probably going to wrap up here. But I would say this. The 2D20 system is complicated for a narrative game, I think. Forged in the Dark, I think Powered by the Apocalypse, I think Fate are much easier. But one of the complaints that I often see is that those games lack crunch, that they lack depth. The 2D20 games have pretty good depth. And there's a lot of sort of, I don't want to say character building, but there is a lot of detail into it. Now, in this particular instance, I really like the Dune implementation of the 2D20. Prior versions of 2D20, like Star Trek Adventures, used something called the challenge die, which was a separate D6. I didn't really like it. This version only uses D20s. And at most, I think 5 of them is the most that you'll ever roll. Now, Doc Flamingo asks a great question. Is this meant to be played on Arrakis by the controlling house or just anywhere in the Imperium? Here's the deal. Here's the problem with Dune. Let me just say this as a broader thing in Dune. Here's the problem with Dune. The problem with Dune is in the novel, in the book, right? From a role-playing game perspective. Before Paul becomes Muad'Dib, and before the jihad spreads through the universe and the Fremen kill everybody and he becomes the emperor, okay? Before that happens, the universe of Dune is awesome for role-playing games because you have this, this détente between all the competing powers. You have the Landsrod against the Emperor, against the Spacing Guild with the Bene Gesserit in the background, secretly trying to spin their manipulations. As often is the case in movies, you have this really interesting universe, and then in the book, the main character, kind of fucks it up and shits the bed because they change all of that and they get rid of all the cool stuff that made you kind of really like the system. So I will say that part of the problem with Dune is, in my belief, the key to playing Dune is to ignore all the stuff that happens in the movie and pretend that like Paul does not become the Kwisatz Haderach, that the Bene Gesserit are still working their schemes. Because I think that's a much more interesting universe than the one in which Paul and the Atreides, take over Arrakis. So the question is it meant to be played on Arrakis? Well, a lot of the books focus on Arrakis. And to be clear, melange is the most valuable spice, most valuable thing in the entire universe. So I don't necessarily know that you are meant to be the controlling house. And certainly the rules of the game support you playing anywhere and doing anything in Dune. That being said, it's not hyperbole to say that the universe of Dune is a wheel, right? That spins on the hub that is Arrakis. I mean, the entire universe revolves around Arrakis. So in a way, everybody's fates are sort of tied to that planet. Now, does that mean that you need to be there? No, I don't think you do. I actually don't think you do. I think there's a lot of stuff in the book. They have an entire book, just dedicated to Arrakis. But this one's all about the Landsrod, right? Which is the sort of the game of houses and, all the different noble houses of the Imperium and the sort of, shenanigans that they get into. And this one's just about the Emperor. I also think there's a Bene Gesserit book. I don't know where that one is. Oh, maybe it's this one. Oh, there we go. It's in the shrink wrap because I never opened it. This is a campaign that they have, Masters of Dune. And by the way, to Doc Flamingo's point, this campaign book, the premise of this campaign book is, and I quote, "Your house has claimed the wealth of Arrakis, but can they hold on to that power when so many want to take it from them?" So this basically is sort of like a Marvel what if, and this basically is a what if campaign. What if House Atreides didn't take over Arrakis? What if your house took over Arrakis after the Harkonnens were forced out by the Emperor? So yeah, I think you can go anywhere, but I mean, I don't think it's horrible if you focus your campaign on Dune. So Jordan says they have a solid select section on how to play anywhere in the broader Dune timeline and enough details that you don't need to read those books. Right. There's a lot of books of Dune that have come out over the years, and I haven't read them all, so I don't even necessarily know all that earlier stuff. You know what? Yeah, Mark, I imagine it's a lot like playing in Star Wars, and it's kind of like, it's really, easy to get swept up in like the, oh, well, I should be doing the thing that Luke is doing and I should be there fighting at the Death Star. But it's a big universe and there's a lot of other stuff going around. But I like the kind of what if scenario where we kind of assume that this really cool place, because Dune, chef's kiss. Frank Herbert knew what he was doing. Like Dune as a novel obviously works really well, but Frank Herbert wanted, kind of swashbuckling adventure in space. And so, a lot of the things in Dune are, for my money, lightsabers in Star Wars do a similar thing, but they're exclusively the province of the Jedi. Whereas in Dune, because everybody has these personal energy shields and they're pretty ubiquitous and everywhere, and personal energy shields basically make firearms or guns pointless, and laser weapons don't work against them because everything explodes in a nuclear subatomic fusion. So you can't really use, when we think of future tech and ray guns and like long range artillery, it doesn't work. So Dune, it's so far in the future that it's like you get to play like, a sword master in the sci-fi world. You could be a hand-to-hand master in martial arts in this, far future state. Melange and the abilities that it unlocks, the powers of the Mentats and the Navigators and the Bene Gesserit and the Bene Tleilax, like they give you enough like magical sort of quasi shenanigans. You know, it's science fiction. And so I think that the setting is really ripe for some really cool role playing because there's so much about the campaign that works well in the context of trying to play it as a TTRPG, which I think is really, really cool. Doc Flamingo says, I played a Dune campaign in Space Master. The premise was they all worked for the Atreides and uncovered Yui's plot before it happened. That's cool. I think that's pretty cool. I like the idea of doing a what if. And again, I think for me, a big thing, you know, it's like the Avatar game from Powered by the Apocalypse, right? And they say, no, there's no playbook to be the Avatar. Nobody gets to be the Avatar. Nobody gets to be the Avatar. I think that if you're going to play Dune, like as a campaign, you probably want to mostly, I would think, you don't want to necessarily be involved with the Kwisatz Haderach and, you know, or if you're doing it in the aftermath of, you know, when after the jihad and when Paul has sort of fallen from grace and gone out to the desert or whatever, that's different. But I think that prime era, but you know, is probably a little bit best to avoid. Oh, there you go. There's a campaign book coming out soon. We play a house during the fall of the Imperium after Muad'Dib messes up for everyone. That's very interesting. I'm much more interested in the house before Muad'Dib, or in the universe before Muad'Dib messed everything up. But again, I don't think that it's bad that people want to play on Arrakis because it's Dune, but because in the world, in the universe of Dune, Dune is like the most important planet in the universe. I am not familiar with the Smallville game. I remember that was like all over Gen Con, like forever ago. The collection of drives is almost identical. Very interesting. Yeah, Cortex. I've always kind of bounced off of Cortex a little bit. Now, that being said, what do I give this game? What do I give 2D20? Well, like I said before, Legends of Fate in the Dark. I like Legends of the Five Rings, and I like Fate, and I like Blaze in the Dark. But there's a lot going on here. A lot of times when I, play one of those narrative story first games, it's because I want to kind of get the mechanics a little bit out of the way, and I want to focus more on the story building. This game, with its, threat and momentum and determination points and drives, it's a much more chewy narrative experience. And I don't necessarily know that it's like my favorite game. Now, I was first introduced to the 2D20 system through a book actually Aaron had gotten, which was the Conan 2D20 system. This was like one of their earlier versions of the 2D20 system. And it was much less polished. And like I said, they've done a good job of sort of quietly patching the game with each new product release. They're all 2D20, but they're all a little bit different. And Conan came earlier. It was a little rough. But my main problem was I looked at it and I said, man, Conan is sword and sorcery, high adventure, barbarian swashbuckling. This is far too focused and detailed and, crunchy, and has way too many little nibbly fiddly bits for me to really feel like this is the style of play that I want to have. And so I bounced off of it pretty hard. Now, Star Trek, I liked a lot better. And I think Dune, I like even more. And I think it works better for those particular worlds or genres. But I still feel like this game occupies a very strange place, because most of the time, when we go back to my obscure esoteric charts, usually when we think of story games, narrative games, we usually think of games that are less complicated, right? We think of games that don't have as much, gamey mechanics or long, complications. This game has a lot of crunch for a story game. I'm not saying this is, GURPS or something, but it does have a lot of little nuances. And so I think it's interesting, and I think it deserves a place on your shelf or your virtual shelf, because I do think that there's things that they're doing here. That being said, a lot of things that they're doing here are things that I really like in other games, which is to say, like, I mean, do I like the splitting of drives and skills or, ability scores? Yeah, sure. I like that because I like that from Legend of the Five Rings. I think that's a really cool way to approach it. And I think this game's way of doing it motivation based is really, really interesting. And it really ties into what does this game care about? The game cares about what you're doing and why. And who are these characters? What are their ambitions? It's a very politically minded, even internally politically minded, like within the mind of yourself. Someone was joking about, do you have to do an internal monologue? And I was like, yeah, kind of, I could easily imagine around the table, when someone's going to do a thing and they pick their drive of power. They're like, they have like this moment where they're like talking to the table, but it's like really it's an internal monologue in their PC's mind. It's like, this will be my master stroke that will finally clear the way for me to assume my rightful rule over the Arrakis. It's this kind of like quiet moment. So yeah, good stuff, good times. Hopefully everybody goes out and sees the movie. I'm going to go see it tomorrow morning. Really looking forward to that. And yeah, I think it'll be a good time. Now, again, if you're interested in this game, if you're interested in talking about this game, definitely consider checking out our Patreon, Knights of the Last Call. We have a link in the description below, or patreon.com/Knights of the Last Call. We have a small private Discord with only a couple hundred people. But we're all very passionate gamers who are really interested in playing and GMing a lot of different games. There's 20 or 30 different systems that are being played every couple months between our community games and people's short mini campaigns. There's always new game systems that are being tried out. And if you are wanting to run a new game system and are having a hard time finding people who don't just want to play like 5e, the Knights of the Last Call Patreon might be the place for you to get your games in, because everyone there pretty much loves spending their money on new RPGs and finding new RPGs. It's kind of one of the things that ties us all together. So yeah, looking forward to the movie tomorrow. I'm hoping that they have the iconic sandworm popcorn option, because I will get that just because that's, I consider that to be iconically part of the movie at this point. Yeah, I think it'll be really, really interesting. Where I'm interested to see what Denis Villeneuve does. I understand that he's going to be doing a third movie, which is going to be Dune Messiah, but he's not going to be doing Children of Dune, which I don't hate. As much. I think that's pretty cool. Dune Messiah is a very sad book, so it'll be interesting to see what he does with that. But we'll definitely have my thoughts. I'll be sharing them, I'm sure, with the patrons tomorrow after I see the film. But yeah, check out 2D20 if you're interested. Apparently, there's a Humble Bundle going on right now. I don't know if it's going to be going on when you see this, but if it's past the Humble Bundle, there is a link in the description that takes you over to Drive-Thru RPG. It's our affiliate link. Doesn't cost you any extra money, but we get a couple, like maybe 50 cents or something if you buy it through that link. Okay. Well, that's gonna do it for me. Thanks everybody for hanging out with me tonight. Thank you to our good friend Philip Bush, Henry, and Karima for throwing in your $10 each. Again, a smaller stream, with not quite so as many people. But that's okay, because we're here for that too. And the reason that we can do all these is because of the Knights of Last Call Patreon. Thank you so much to all of our supporters. And I think everybody there does such an amazing job of not just supporting what I do and what Bob does and what Smith does, but also supporting each other. And it's almost taken on a life of its own. And I think that is been really cool to see. Henry proving me right. And the last minute says the sleeper must awaken. With $40. Henry, we will get another Class Deep Dive stream. And since Henry put a massive $40 into that, Henry, I'm going to let you go ahead and pick it. So I'll let you pick what class we do next. It's got to be obviously be one that we haven't done yet. And obviously it's more fun if it's one that goes all the way back to the beginning of the game. But Henry, consider that to be your privilege. But thank you for awakening the sleeper. I have taken the water of life and I have transmuted the awareness spectrum narcotic, thus awakening my genetic memory on both halves, female and male. And now I can see all places at once. I know all things, not just the present and not just the past, but the now. Anyways, I have become the Quisas Haderach, the shortening of the way. Anyways, thank you, Henry. Actually, I don't know why this reminded me of this. My favorite line from the original movie is said by Brad Dourif's character. He plays the Twisted Mentat, Piter de Vries, and he's going to meet with the Baron, and he's flying in on this little ship, and he pulls out this little vial of Safu juice, and he goes, "It is by will alone I set my mind in motion. It is by the juice of Safu that thoughts acquire speed, the lips acquire stain, the stains become a warning. It is by will alone I set my mind in motion. It is by will alone I set my mind in motion. It is by the juice of Safu that thoughts acquire speed, the lips acquire stain, the stains become a warning. It is by will alone I set my mind in motion." And then he drinks it. It's like the weirdest fucking scene of all time. But I don't know why. As a kid, I loved it. I thought it was so cool. I was like, oh man, this guy's so awesome. So you will settle for taking the juice of Safu. Very, very good choice. It's made from the Ecas root, actually. Yeah, I mean, listen, the litany against fear is really good. In fact, actually, the only time I've ever thought about getting a tattoo was going to be, I was going to get a tattoo. I don't know where I was going to get it, maybe on my shoulder or something, or maybe my collar, but I don't know, somewhere. Not immediately apparent, but it was going to say, "Only I will remain," which is the last line of the litany against fear. It is by will alone, and also this juice box. Actually, it's really funny because I think in that next scene is where David Lynch has the Beast Raban, and he has this little freaking plastic juice box in the film. And it's got a little creature inside of it, like a mouse or something. And he crunches it, and it crunches the creature and kills it. And then he slurps out its juices through this straw. Such a weird fucking movie. Mike, your first full stream in a while. I'm stoked. Thanks, Derek. Talk to you soon. Mike, thanks for stopping by. Appreciate having you here, buddy. Thank you for being a good friend and a good pal. But thank you, Henry, for your incredible support. Thank you, Philip Bush. And thank you, Karama, for all of this, for all that you've done tonight and all that you've done all the time. Mike says Bene Tlilax greater than the Bene Gesserit, greater than the Order of Mentats. Ooh, I will say this. I've played a lot of the Dune board game, which is, by the way, a fucking masterpiece. I love that game so much. But my favorite is to play as the Spacing Guild. I think the navigators are really sweet. I love the way that they control everything. But if I had to pick between the Bene Tlilax or the Bene Gesserit or the Order of Mentats, I'm gonna take the Bene Gesserit. I like the Bene Gesserit, and I think I love the Prana Bindu. I love the voice. I love their powers of observation. It's very cool. To truly appreciate Dune, you have to play Dune the board game. And you have to play it the way it was meant to be played. 6 players, with everybody fully understanding how the game works. And it's it will teach you what the universe of Dune is, no matter what. Because when you go wait a second, let me get this straight. We're all battling over Dune, but no matter what we do, the Spacing Guild gets all of our money. And it's yes, now you understand that the Spacing Guild has all the power. It's this is so frustrating. You're oh, wait. No. I can go gather spice on the planet. That'll give me money. You're right. It will. And the Spacing Guild will take that. And the Spacing Guild will take that. And the Spacing Guild will take that. I love it. Also, for those of you who don't know, those of you who don't know Dune the board game, one of my absolute favorite mechanics about it, so this is the original Dune. Now, for a long time, this game could not be found because it was out of print and the Frank Herbert estate didn't give anybody the license to produce it. The original game came out, I think, in the late 70s. It was kind of like a collector's item. Then Fantasy Flight Games acquired the rules to the board game, but they couldn't use any of the IP. So they created a version of Dune, the board game, that is called not Twilight Rex. Maybe it's called Twilight Rex. It's set in like the Twilight Imperium universe. It literally is Dune, the board game, with the serial numbers scraped off and replaced with Twilight Imperium IP. Mechatol Rex? I don't know. Anyways. But now when the Dune IP got all big again over the last like 10 years, they've been able to produce it. This is Dune, the board game. It can play up to 6 players. One player can play House Atreides. One player can play House Harkonnen. One player can play the Fremen. One player can play the Emperor. One player can play the Spacing Guild. And one player can play the Bene Gesserit. And it's so cool. It's such a good game. But, Rex. Yes, I said Mechatol Rex, but yes, Rex, Final Days of an Empire. That is the name of the Dune clone that is they did a good job with it. They actually fixed some of the issues that I had with Dune, so it's pretty good. But one of my favorite things, my absolute favorite things about Dune is the Bene Gesserit. Okay, like there's the planet Dune. It's ostensibly an area control game. There's the planet Dune, and there are 5 locations. It's divided up into a bunch of zones like Risk or Axis and Allies, and there are 5 territories that have a command capital city or a command city. If a player controls 3 of the 5 at the end of a turn, they win the game. And then if nobody wins the game because they didn't control 3, then after, I want to say 8 turns, it might be 8 turns. After 8 turns, then the Fremen win because basically nobody took over their planet. So good for them. So they win. But one of my favorite things about the game is at the beginning of the game, the Bene Gesserit player secretly picks one player and picks a turn number. So I might secretly pick House Atreides, turn 6. And then if House Atreides wins the game on turn 6, they're all super excited. They just won the game. I flip over my cards and it's revealed that actually I won the game. Not only do I win the game, they lost the game. They just lost the game. Everybody lost the game, but I won the game. And it's because it was actually, a plan within a plan within a plan. Turns out the whole game, I had been manipulating you and trying to help you at the exact right amount so that not only would you win, you would win on turn 6. And then when you thought you were winning and you thought I wasn't, turns out I was the whole time. So when the Bene Gesserit player starts trying to help you out, you're like, oh, what do you want? They're like, nothing. I don't want anything. I'm just here to I just want you to do well, man. You're like, wait a second. Wait. Are they trying to get me to win on a certain turn? It's like again, one of the themes of Dune, right, is the plans within plans within plans. And it's just so that board game just makes it come out so much in the wash. And there's these traitor cards and you never know who you can trust on your own team. It's so cool. Anyways, very fun game. Good times. Very good times. Maybe someday. You know what? Matt Colville, I think, played it. If you want to watch it played. Matt Colville, I think, did like a full, 4-hour live stream or something of him playing it with. I don't know if he played it with people who knew the game or knew Dune, which if you know Dune really well, but you don't know the board game, that would still be okay. And if you know the game really well, that's awesome. But if you don't know the game and you don't know Dune, it could be really problematic. But anyways, it's an amazing game, and it just creates these awesome, fun, thematic, flavorful things. So, 2D20 Dune, Adventure in the Imperium, very cool. But Dune the board game is nice. Yeah, definitely not worth playing with less than 4 people. 100%. Doc Flamingo, 100%. Correct. You don't have to play with 6, but yeah, 4, 5, 6. The 5 and 6 are probably very good. I have not played Dune Imperium yet, Hardrick, but I have heard really good things about it. And not just, it's Dune, but you can play it in half the time, and the rules teach is, actually comprehensible. I've actually heard it's a good game. So, but I haven't played it yet. Maybe I'll play it at Origins this year. That might be on my list to check out, but I do love it. So, anyways, thanks everybody for hanging out with me. Enjoy the movie if you haven't seen it yet or you're going to go see it. And hopefully we'll catch you next time on Knights of Last Call. Good night, everybody. Peace out.